I'm Willa Latham and I love antique porcelain. And last time I told you about some Chelsea porcelain, and Chelsea was the pottery in Britain that started making porcelain in the 1740s, really. This time I'm going to pick up at the end of the Chelsea era. Chelsea lived and died with its founder Nicolas Brimont. When he died in 1770, the pottery couldn't really go on because it was Nicolas Brimont. He was such a creative genius. So then the Chelsea pottery got bought by the Derby pottery, and that's what made Derby a truly great pottery, and they're still going today. But it was really the influence of Chelsea that made Derby great. Now, a very interesting thing happened in a transition period between about 1770 and 1780, because the Derby pottery bought all the molds from the Chelsea pottery. They would get them over to Derby, make the porcelain, and then they would ship it back to Chelsea and have the Chelsea painters decorate it. And then slowly they started to really truly merge and integrate, and they sold the Chelsea premises and everybody moved to Derby, and it was just Derby. Now this little figure, this sweet little shepherdess with her lamb, is from that transition period that we call Chelsea Derby. It was made in a Chelsea mold in Derby, and most probably it was decorated in Chelsea again. And how do we know that? Well, it's got some very vague inscriptions at the bottom that give us clues, and also it's just the whole way it is decorated. The way it's very finely, beautifully painted, very tender expressions. It's really something that they did mostly in Chelsea, and the Derby style started to change a little bit. So I could be wrong, but probably this is what happened. Now it's a very beautiful little figure. Look at her. It has real artistic value. Look at her face, a very tender expression. She's sort of looking into whatever, the future, looking out over a hill, I don't know. Look at the little lamb. It's got a very, very tender face looking up at her. And her little hands and the little feet of the lamb. It's very sweetly done. The skirt also falls beautifully. It's beautifully shaped and painted. So yeah, I really love this statue. So what was the purpose of these figures? Most of us in the 20th and 21st centuries will remember that we had an old aunt with figures like these sitting in the windowsill or in a little cabinet in the living room. And as children, we would feel a little bit embarrassed because it was really very bourgeois and they weren't very nice. It was something for old people. I always hated those. But then when I found out about these, I really fell in love with them. And why is that? Because they have a real artistic value. They're just so beautifully made. And the purpose of these may be quite surprising. They were used for dessert. People would give big dinners at home. And of course, when you give a big dinner, it's really the dessert that is the most important part of dinner, because that's when people start to really talk very frankly. People have gotten to know each other, they've warmed up to each other. The conversation is often becoming much more frank, has more impact. So it's very important, that last part of your dinner party, to guide the conversation carefully. And that's where these figures came in. Because any host who had a lot of money would buy a series of these with a particular theme. They wouldn't just be randomly chosen. So this one is a shepherdess. She probably was a pair with a shepherd. I'm still looking for the shepherd. I know there are shepherds out there. I'm gonna get it. And then it would come with little sheep and cows and sweet little animals. And perhaps a washer lady or a tea seller or flower sellers. So this is clearly a sort of a rural theme. They also came sometimes as caricatures of politicians. There aren't many around, but there are some around. Well, you can imagine what conversation that would engender. And then there were the ones of the seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter. And I guess that's really about time, right? It would engender a conversation about time, about the future. Perhaps they needed to do a business deal. Perhaps they needed to arrange a marriage. So that's what that would be around. And then there was also a famous series called the Commedia dell'arte. And Commedia dell'arte was an Italian art form. It was, I would say, the 18th century equivalent of Netflix comics. So it was very funny. It was all monkeys doing stuff and people with masks. And of course, that would engender a very hilarious conversation. So I would say this, you could compare this to an 18th century David Attenborough series. So you would get a very sophisticated conversation about rural elements, or maybe about the beauty of nature, the goodness of rural life. Because you have to see, this was the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So it was very exciting, but people also felt quite threatened by the great changes to life. So that's when they became very romantic about rural life. So that's what was the purpose of these beautiful figures. You see them around. They're, of course, very valuable because they're very old and they're very, very beautiful. They are nothing like those 20th century figures that you saw in your aunt's windowsill. So have a good look. You can see some of them on my website. It's gentlerattleofchina.com, and you can find me on YouTube, Instagram, or Facebook. Thank you for watching. See you again. Bye bye.